Yes, we know. Gonzaga is a top 5 team, and this is a true David versus Goliath scenario. But I think the Mountaineers have a chance. What say you? Let's talk about it. This is Locked On West Virginia.
You are Locked On West Virginia, your daily podcast on the West Virginia Mountaineers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up? Welcome in, guys. My name is Mountaineer Paul. This is a Locked On crossover episode of Locked On West Virginia and Locked On Gonzaga. Thank you guys for being here today. It's going to be a fun episode, man, and we don't get to do these every day. So thank you for making Locked On West Virginia and Gonzaga your first listen every day, and for being part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we talk about your team every single day. Don't forget, guys, this episode is going to be brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers make a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. That's if you win. Place that first $5 bet and get up to $150. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. So, got to bring the man on, of course, with Locked On Gonzaga, or Locked On Zags, I should say. Andy Patton, what's up, brother? How we doing?
Hey, Paul. I'm doing great, man. I'm excited about this. Excited for Atlantis. Excited to talk some college hoops.
Yeah, and you guys are the heavy favorites in this thing. One of the better Gonzaga teams, 1 through 8, you're going to find. And I think, you guys have got 4 players that start at most Power 5 universities on your bench. Truly, Mark Few, one of his better jobs. The portal has been kind to the Zags. What is it about this team that makes them so good outside of that incredible 3-guard lineup with Hickman? I'll let you talk about them.
Yeah, I think what has really impressed me about this team in particular has been the effort we've seen on the defensive side of the ball. For the last half decade or so, outside of the championship run in 2021 when they had Jalen Suggs, the year after that they had Chet Holmgren, but outside of that, they haven't had a lot of great defensive teams. And even that team with Chet, he was incredibly impactful. Obviously, we've seen him have that impact in the NBA as well. But that team wasn't great defensively, even with him. And coming into this year, I thought this team was going to be great offensively. I'm not surprised to see them at the top of Ken Palm's offensive efficiency ratings. I think I would have predicted that, or at least they'd be in that conversation. But they're a top 20 team defensively in the early going. And for a lot of teams, you play 5 games and you're doing really well defensively. Well, it's because you haven't played anybody yet. That's not the case for Gonzaga. They played a Baylor team that hasn't been as good as expected this year, but that's still a very good squad. They played Arizona State, who's looked better than expected. They played San Diego State, who just walloped Creighton in a game a few minutes ago as we're recording this. So for Gonzaga to be in this conversation defensively has really impressed me. I'm not surprised the offense is humming along the way that it is. Caleb Battle and Michael Ajayi were 2 players coming in who we kind of knew were going to bring it on the offensive side of the ball, but they've been very impactful defensively. And some of the other players who were on this team last year seem to have stepped up to contribute in that area. And I think that's what makes this team more dangerous than I think a lot of people expected they would be.
This is I don't want to call it a rivalry because West Virginia's 0-5 against the Zags, but man, we played some close games with you guys. A couple games, truthfully, we should have won. The game in, what was it, 2017,
yeah.
that comes to mind, 58-61. West Virginia was in that down to the last shot. Man, what an incredible game that was. And you even go to the 20. And there was, but I mean, that was a really good basketball team West Virginia had that year with 2-time Defensive Player of the Year Javon Carter, Issa Ahmad, Daxter Miles, Nathan Adrian, Elijah Macon. That was press Virginia at its best. Gonzaga, I mean, Jonathan Williams, Jordan Matthews, Nigel Williams-Gross, Josh Perkins, Silas Melson. Like, dude, you guys had a squad that year too. What a game that was. And I don't know if this will replicate that, but man, I think if West Virginia, it's not if, but when. I think West Virginia gets rolling. Maybe not this year, but under DeVries. I'm a huge believer in him as a coach. And they really run a similar offensive system to Mark Few as far as they want to get out in transition. They want to have ball movement and spacing on the perimeter, and they want to shoot threes, but they want to get inside touches too with a little more balance. What is it like for you as far as Gonzaga on the inside this year. We hear so much about those three guards.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about those guys, those bigs.
Yeah, I think first of all, I enjoy this matchup when it comes across. Obviously, that 17 game was far more enjoyable on the Gonzaga side than it was on the other side. But that was an incredible basketball game, one of my favorites in recent memory. But for Gonzaga, I think they do a really good job of funneling the offense through the post, but because they have so much offensive firepower in the backcourt, they can kind of attack you multiple different ways. And I mean, Ryan Nembhard has point blank been the best point guard in college basketball this year. And I think people will say, oh, well, what about Braden Smith at Purdue? Or, what about some of the higher scoring guards like Mark Sears or RJ Davis? And I think it depends on your definition of point guard in some situations, but Ryan Nembhard's assist to turnover ratio this year is otherworldly. Through the first 4 games of the college basketball season, his points, assists, and turnover numbers, nobody had ever done that in the 4-game stretch to start a season since Chris Paul. That's how elite he has been at taking care of the basketball, at distributing the basketball. He's not an elite scorer, but he doesn't have to be. I think if you're leading the charge on an offense that's scoring 90 points per game, I don't really care how many points you're scoring because you're obviously doing something right with the basketball in your hands. And Nolan Hickman's kind of just a steadying presence. He's in his 4th year. He's a good 3-point shooter. You trust him with the basketball. He was kind of quieter earlier in his career, but has really emerged as a really good 3rd or 4th option for this team. And then Caleb Battle, well-traveled, started at Butler, spent 3 years at Temple, was at Arkansas last year. In the last 7 games at Arkansas, I think he averaged about 30 points a game, just went crazy down the stretch. And Gonzaga said, yeah, we could use a guy who can do that. Went out, got him, brought him into the system, and he's still finding himself. He's had some really good games. He's had some quieter games in the early going. I think he's going to be a tremendous, tremendous piece for this team. And it's what they didn't have last year. Last year's depth in the backcourt was really lacking. It cost them a road game against Washington. It cost them a road game against Santa Clara, teams they don't typically lose to. And yet they went out and addressed the issue. They got a guy in Battle who fixes those problems in a tremendous way. And the depth for this team, which was a problem last year, is as good as it's been since their championship runner-up season in 2017.
I think, like I was talking about this West Virginia team earlier, a few Mountaineer fans are out on the Mountaineers because of the Pitt showing, which I do think is going to be not the rule. It's the exception to the season. How many games are you going to go 6 for 29 from 3 and shoot 38% from the field? They shot 17% from the field in the first half. You don't win games when you do that bad. This is a team that's 12 brand new players are being implemented in a first-year regime. It's not going to go smooth early. There's a lot of talent on this team, nowhere near as much as Gonzaga. I think positionally, West Virginia has a couple guys that match up with Gonzaga. Tucker DeVries absolutely matches up, would probably start on a Gonzaga team. He would be great for what you guys do. 2-time Missouri Valley Conference Player of the Year. We love what he does. He stuffs the stat sheet. We love Javon Small at point guard. I don't know if he's as high level as some of the guards you're going to see at Gonzaga this year, but I mean, he's a 15 points per game guy in the Big 12. That's pretty good. Yeah. Obviously, you get to Sincere Harris, who I think, and most people think, could surpass, and this is incredible to even think, that he could surpass a guy like Javon Carter at West Virginia on the defensive side of the ball. He actually has the tools to do it. One of the best all-ball in our history already. He's making incredible impacts. So we'll see. He's been able to take multiple guys out of the game. What do you think Coach View's offensive philosophy, defensive philosophy, like what do you think his mindset is in this game? Do you think he's thinking any further than West Virginia, or do you think he's looking at the rest of the field?
Yeah, I'm sure they've scouted out some of the other teams that are in this thing. Obviously, the big storyline coming into Atlantis is whether there will be a Gonzaga-Arizona matchup, as Tommy Lloyd, the head coach at Arizona, was an assistant for Gonzaga for 20 years, and they have not played each other since he left to go take that job at Arizona. And so I think that's the big storyline. But I can promise you from everything I know about Mark Few and this team that they're doing everything they can to not look ahead. That's the last thing they want to do is trip themselves up and not get an opportunity to play that game. Again, of course, that's assuming Arizona also takes care of business on their side of the bracket. But I think for Gonzaga, they're looking at this game as an opportunity to continue to work on getting some of the bigs going. Gonzaga has been very good so far this year without Graham Ike looking like the player that he was last year. Graham had a dominant second half against San Diego State, scored 20 points in that half alone. But really, outside of that half of basketball, he hasn't been what we saw from him in the second half of last year when he was dominating Hunter Dickinson at Kansas, and when he was, he scored 20 something against Kentucky in that game as well on the road. And so I think, you look at this West Virginia team, and I think there's not a ton of size. They do have a very good rim protector on the roster, and Eduardo Andre, and they have some other guys who play bigger than they are, and I think could trip up some of the players in the front court. But with somebody like Sincere Harris, who you mentioned being so good defensively, and some bigger guards, DeVries and Small are probably bigger than the players who are going to be guarding them, and are going to be able to kind of potentially create some length issues for Gonzaga in the backcourt. Right. I think the answer is to just pound the ball to Graham Ike and let him go to work. And if he's having an off night, bring in Braden Huff off the bench, who scored 20 points multiple times this year as a backup center, and let him go to work. And I think, Gonzaga has the advantage in the front court in this game, particularly offensively. And I have little doubt that that's what they're going to do to try to get the advantage in this game.
As Mark Pugh's MO has usually been, he likes to get paint touches. Up next on Locked On West Virginia and Gonzaga crossover, what are the keys to this game for both? I think we just mentioned one, paint touches for Mark Pugh. What about from the West Virginia side of things? And what about this coaching matchup, man? I think this is a young up-and-comer versus a legend. It's kind of interesting. We'll talk about that and more up next on Locked On West Virginia and Gonzaga crossover. And this episode of Locked On and West Virginia and Gonzaga crossover is brought to you by none other than Return On You, guys. West Virginia fans, listen up. You need to download the Return On You app. You've heard us talk about Return On You this season and how they revolutionized the NIL industry. Return On You allows you, the fan, to have a say in who gets NIL money. And here's what I absolutely love about Return On You. You get your money back if that player transfers. Return On You is helping us keep our team intact, and it's actually good for the game long term. Now, let's spotlight the Return On You Locked On Player of the Week. Obviously, we're talking about none other than TJ Jackson, one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12. Wouldn't have anybody but TJ in that spot. We're going to throw some money into his account on Return On You. Every contribution counts, $10, $20. It all adds up, and it's going to help your favorite players stay put. Join me and show some love for TJ. Download the Return On You app. Go to returnonyou.com today. Use promo code Locked On, and every athlete from every team is there. No purchase is necessary. Void where prohibited. And join returnonyou.com for the full terms. And, of course, we can't forget about FanDuel, guys. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets. That's if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more. On the same page you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started and get that $150 in bonus bets. Don't forget you have to win first. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. And we are back. Thank you for being patient, guys. Back with Locked On Zags on the crossover episode here. Andy, man, thanks you for being patient as I read those off. It's a lot of reading, isn't it? Let's get the keys to the game here. I think this is an interesting matchup because obviously this is a David versus Goliath scenario. I think it's fair to say that. This is a first-year regime with West Virginia with 12 new players that have never played together very much against the Gonzaga team that's got a legendary coach that's used to putting rosters together with some returning players. What do you think Gonzaga has to do to just kind of do what they're supposed to do in this game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. We touched on it a little bit earlier. Certainly feeding the post and getting Graham some early paint touches, or Braden, or even Ben or Michael Ajayi, Ben Gregg. Those two guys haven't been scores on the block as much, but if the matchup dictates, I think being able to force the ball down low and score around the rim, try to get West Virginia bigs in foul trouble when they can, get to the free throw line that way. I think that's probably going to be like the top of the chart for Gonzaga in terms of what they want to do offensively. And I think defensively, the main thing is keeping West Virginia off the three-point line as much as possible and just contesting shots. West Virginia is shooting it well from beyond the arc. I mean, they have multiple good three-point shooters on this team. I think if you were to tell me that West Virginia wins this game and ask me to guess what happened, I think the first thing I would say is that some combination of Javon Small and Tucker DeVries and Jonathan Powell all hit 5+ threes or 4+ threes, something like that. All of those guys are 40+% three-point shooters on the year. And Gonzaga this year has defended the three-point line extremely well. I think they're holding teams to like 22%, which is not going to hold. That's obviously going to come up as the year goes on. And some of it's just some teams shooting poorly early in the season, but they have made a conscious effort to do that. And the only game where they struggled in that area was against Arizona State, where they were slow on their rotations, and you saw a lot of opportunities where Arizona State swung the ball around and got open looks from three. I think if West Virginia scouts that tape, which I'm sure they did, and they see those opportunities of, hey, if we can find ways to move the ball quickly around the perimeter, we can get open looks from three. And if we shoot it better than Arizona State did, that's a way for this team to stay in the game. So I am sure that Mark Few and the staff are figuring out what are ways that we can keep those guys off the line, even if it's, overcommitting and forcing them to put the ball on the deck and driving to the basket. Like, that's not great, and certainly not good if it results in Graham Ike or guys like that picking up fouls. But you also can't give up a bunch of open looks to this team. That's the clearest way that I think Gonzaga could find themselves in serious trouble in this game, is if they aren't defending the perimeter as well as they can.
And you mentioned Jonathan Powell, who's been an absolute revelation. He was a top 80 player. West Virginia and Darren DeVries was able to flip him. Borderline 4.5-star player from Xavier. It was a nice flip. We weren't expecting him to contribute to certainly his career. It turns out he's pushing for that starting spot over Toby Okani, who is 6'8", by the way. You're talking about that positional size and length that West Virginia has. Toby Okani, who was the best player on University of Illinois Chicago last year. Now, let's just keep it real. But he was the best player on that team, put 31 up on Drake. Darren DeVries liked him, brought him in. He's a good defender. But no doubt about it, Powell is the offensive weapon as a true freshman. And West Virginia has another great true freshman in KJ Tenner, who's scored in double digits a couple times this year. I remember 4 months ago, Darren DeVries said, and this is before they'd had any practices or anything, he said, I already trust this kid in the Big 12. And I said, what? A true freshman? So that's pretty impressive to hear. And he's really shown to be. And then I interviewed him, and I was like, I see what he was talking about now. This kid is extremely, and I mean truthfully, one of the most mature, down-to-earth kids you've ever met at 18 in your life. He's an X factor. I think he's a guy that's have a lot of upside. He hasn't met that yet. He's got an incredible runner that he can hit from all the way out to almost the three-point line. It's the weirdest thing. But when guys are small, they kind of have to come up with different ways to score. Yeah. So this coaching matchup, Andy, this Mark Few the legend. I mean, he's done it all. Think about it, everything but what
almost done it all.
Almost done it all, everything but the national championship.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe that happens this year.
Yeah.
I mean, he's coached everybody from in the Olympics. I mean, he's literally done it all. I think this was made probably thinking Huggins was going to be the coach again for another great matchup. So what do you think about Darren DeVries? Have you done any studying on him? Being that he comes from that McDermott pipeline, obviously very highly thought of coach as well.
Yeah. I really enjoyed what he was able to do at Drake. I think the Missouri Valley Conference was an extremely fun conference last year. I'm anxious to see how it does this year. Drake without him has been fantastic. They just went out and won their tournament, beat Miami and a couple other really good teams out there. But DeVries was fantastic. Obviously, Josh Schertz was the coach at Indiana State in that same conference. He's now at St. Louis, and I really liked what DeVries was able to do with that Drake club. Obviously, his son Tucker had a huge part in that. And when the offseason started, I was doing a lot of writing, kind of trying to figure out who was going to be the where coaches were going to go, what the coaching carousel was going to look like. And DeVries' name kept coming up of like, is he going to go to Vanderbilt? Is he going to go to, even some of the bigger power jobs that were open? Like, is he going to get connected to Louisville or some of those schools? And West Virginia felt like a really good fit. I think they needed to find somebody who's going to kind of just be a breath of fresh air and change the system a little bit, and somebody who's already had success, because you don't want to bring in somebody who's super unproven, especially at a school like that. They're not going to wait 5 years for you to get it done. You got 2, maybe 3, and DeVries, I think, is going to, within 2 or 3 years, you're going to know what kind of coach you got in him. And I think already the early returns with being able to flip somebody like Powell and seeing some of those freshmen develop, it has been really strong. I like the style that they play from what I've seen, from what I've read about them. Like you said, they're trying to get out a little bit more, trying to be a bit more offensively focused. And I think in the Big 12, being able to shoot the 3 ball well and score in a variety of different ways and outrun certain teams is what you really want to be able to do. And, I'm not super confident that this team is going to turn it all the way around in year one. The Big 12 is really good, but they're clearly going in the right direction. I think even after the first few games of the season, we can say that, and how some of these freshmen and younger guys are playing. And I'm optimistic. I think this was one of the better unheralded, not as talked about hires. I think Mark Byington at Vanderbilt was a really great hire, and we've seen that. And I think DeVries is right up in there as another very solid hire that didn't get a ton of press, that I think is going to pay dividends for this team. I don't know how soon, but I think it's going to happen.
I felt like, and I wrote about it as well, I felt like he was the second best guy out there behind Dusty May. That was my personal opinion. I liked Byington as well. I think he's great for Vanderbilt. West Virginia chose DeVries over Byington. I think, if you gave Byington the option, he probably picks West Virginia over Vanderbilt as well.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a better job from what Bob Huggins is able to do with our facilities and everything. Before we go to break, though, wanted to mention Ben McCollum. You mentioned him at Drake. Ren Baker, West Virginia's athletic director, actually made that hire whenever he was at Northwest Missouri State, where he won 3 or 4 national championships. He's going to be an elite coach. I have no doubt that he's going to be great at Drake. So great call on how good they've been to start the year. Up next on Locked On West Virginia and Gonzaga crossover, guys. Obviously, we've got to talk about the prediction and the score. You don't want to miss that. Stick around. And this episode of Locked On West Virginia and Gonzaga crossover is brought to you by ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking, and here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct and not dehydration that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. And just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel best tomorrow. I do not drink, but this is how you use it. Drink pre-alcohol for best results. Make it your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep, and then enjoy tomorrow and wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money guarantee, so you're ever unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, and there's no questions asked there. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. And we're back with Locked On Gonzaga, or Zags. I keep wanting to say Gonzaga. Andy Patton, man, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell everybody what you do over there? If you've got any websites you want to promote, and obviously, I think you're over on X at Andy Patton CBB.
Yes, yep, Andy Patton CBB on X. Locked On Zags also co-host the Locked On College Basketball podcast with Isaac Shade, who's the host of the Locked On Tar Heels. So we're talking college hoops all the time over there. I'm also the lead college basketball writer for USA Today's College Sports Wire. You can check out collegesportswire.com. Check out the college basketball content there.
Awesome, man. And thank you to the 150 you guys watching over on X right now. And for the, looks like on 30 or so of you watching on YouTube, a little bit lower for this one. That's okay. I'll take 200. That's not too bad. this is a game where obviously this could go a bunch of different ways. Gonzaga is going to be heavily favored. I didn't get to see the FanDuel line on this. Have you seen the FanDuel line on this?
14.5. I just pulled it up.
14.5. So I meant to read that off when I did the read. 14.5 for FanDuel. I think that's probably about right. If I were a betting man, I think that's right there where it's going to be. I think Gonzaga wins this game, but I won't be surprised if West Virginia makes it close, especially if they start making shots early and don't do what they did at Pitt. But, I mean, just looking at it objectively, this is a West Virginia team, like I said a couple times on the show. You've got 12 brand-new guys that have never played together. This is like their 5th game together, 6th game together, whatever it is. The one guy that returned to redshirt, so he doesn't count.
Right.
And one of your best 20 points per game scorers still isn't healthy yet. So you have to rely on what you've got. Obviously, Jaden Stone would be huge to get it, but I don't think he's going to be a back for this. So West Virginia can make it close, but I think Gonzaga wins this game. I'm going to say it's going to be a higher scoring game because of the tempo both teams like to play at. I'll say 87-77.
Good. That's a good guess. I was thinking of the score in my head. I was saying like 88-75, 74, somewhere in there. So pretty much the same score projection there.
Yeah.
And I think, a big part of the conversation for Gonzaga too is the fact that 7 of their 8 rotation players from last year are back. Like we talked about the pieces they've added. Caleb Battle, Michael Ajayi are 2 critical pieces that have been added to this team. But the rest of the guys many of them have been here for 3 or 4 years now. Ryan Nembhard's in his 2nd year. Graham Ike's in his 2nd year with the program. Ben Gregg's in his 4th. Nolan Hickman's in his 4th. Like Dusty Stromer and Braden Huff. Dusty's in his 2nd year. Braden's in his 3rd as he redshirted his 1st year. So there's just a ton of continuity in an era of college basketball where so many teams don't have that. And, I don't think Gonzaga is 38 points better than Baylor on a neutral site in February, but they were on November 4th. And I also don't think West Virginia is 14 points worse than Pitt. And I think Pitt is good. But I think, West Virginia, 12 new players, like you said, and we've seen
their first road game.
Yeah, first road game. We've seen teams that have new rosters. Louisville got whacked by Tennessee at home. I don't think that would happen in February,
Right.
I think some of these teams are just, they're just finding that. And with a new coach and a new roster, I mean, there's just a lot of things that Coach DeVries is figuring out. And I think a big part of this game for them is, if they do lose by 12 or 15 points or whatever, which is a reasonable expectation, then you get another opportunity. You get either Louisville or Indiana. We've kind of Louisville in a similar position to West Virginia in a lot of ways. For this team, they get to come out of this more prepared for Big 12 play. And I think that's the biggest thing that West Virginia can take out of this. Gonzaga's in a situation where anything other than winning the championship is a fairly significant disappointment.
Absolutely.
Like, there's no that they have to do. And the thing is like a loss to West Virginia would be bad. A loss to Indiana or Arizona, who are ranked teams right now. So it doesn't feel like it'd be as bad. But if you lose to Indiana, who has the starting center, Umar Bala, who used to play at Gonzaga, fans are not going to be happy about that. If you lose to Tommy Lloyd in Arizona, fans are not going to be happy about that either. So, the pressure is there for Gonzaga in a way that they got to step up and win this one. Whereas for West Virginia, obviously nobody wants to come out of this thing 0-3, and I don't think West Virginia will. But if they come out of this thing 2-1 or 1-2, ultimately the best thing that can happen for this team is you are more prepared for conference play. And at the end of the year, you're feeling like, hey, this team is clearly going in the right direction. And I think that's what's going to happen for West Virginia. I also, again, I'm expecting Gonzaga to win, but I wouldn't be shocked if West Virginia beats either Indiana or Louisville in that second game, and kind of gives whoever else they play, Providence, Oklahoma, Davidson, it gives them a run for their money too.
How much do you think the Tucker DeVries add, bringing along with his dad, and also the Joseph Yesufu, who used to play for DeVries at Drake before he transferred to Kansas, who has coming off an injury, by the way. I wish he was fully back because he's a pretty good player when he's healthy.
Yeah.
How much do you think having those 2 guys at least coming from that know that system it can help a team early in the season? Yeah,
it's a really good thought. DeVries, I'm very curious what he's going to look like because he's not shooting it all that efficiently right now.
Yeah, he had all-season shoulder surgery.
Yeah, he had shoulder surgery. He's in not a new system, but a new team, obviously, new location, all that stuff. I think a lot of people really want to assume that players who are successful at the low major schools aren't going to succeed at high majors, and they frequently do. Obviously, there are counterexamples. There are guys expected to take on bigger roles who transfer and then don't succeed. But there's also a difference between Drake and the Missouri Valley and, like you mentioned, UIC earlier, or some of those other like really smaller schools. Like Drake's a pretty good program. If you can play well at Drake, you can play in the Big 12. You can play at these high major places. And DeVries, I think, he's shooting 40% from three. It's not like he's been bad in that area. I think he's going to be really good. I think he's going to be one of the better transfers in the Big 12. I think he's still recovering a little bit from that injury. But if I was to pick a player for this team that I think is a matchup issue for Gonzaga, I'm concerned about Sincere Harris and his defense. But I'm also concerned about DeVries because I'm not sure who's going to guard him. I think you probably put Caleb Battle on him, but he's given up 2 inches to DeVries, and I think DeVries could potentially, make that work in his favor. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Yusufu, a guy who I saw a little bit at Washington State last year. He didn't play much for the Cougars because he was coming off that injury, but a guy who, won a national championship at Kansas, played at Drake. Like, he's got a ton of experience. I wasn't sure how healthy he was going to be for this game, but he could be a game changer for this team once he's at full strength.
He definitely doesn't look like that Kansas version of Yusufu or the Drake version. If you go back and look at that, I mean, he was a guy that gave them 20 a lot of nights. So I think I had Tucker on. We did an NIL deal with Tucker before I transitioned to Locked On, and he was a pleasant dude to have on. Man. He really was. But that shoulder surgery was the second one he's had in consecutive seasons. So they had to do less this time around, and then he was able to practice for about 3-4 months before the season. But admittedly, he's not 100% back, obviously, as far as game shape especially. But if you look at some of the games he's had this year, he really stuffs the stat sheet. I mean, he's close to a double-double almost every game. He's got 6-8 rebounds every game. Like, he does other things, and he gets his hands on a lot of balls. You wouldn't know it, but he averaged 2 steals a game last year. So, I mean, he's a guy that gets his hand on balls. He's really long. So I think he can make an impact. Really appreciate you for coming on, man. It's been 32 minutes. I think we're a little bit over, which is fine. Talking basketball, sometimes I wish it could last a little longer, Guys, thank you for joining us here. Make sure you go follow Andy. And for those of you on the Gonzaga side of this, make sure you follow me if you want to. If you want to follow the Big 12 at Andy Patton CBB. I'm at Paul Mountaineer on X. And we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Zags and Locked On West Virginia for your first listen. If I could ask you to do me a favor, though, go to Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll, he leads the country, man. He really is one of the best in the business. And he pulls no punches when it comes to anything related to the Big 12. You can find him on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I don't have much else, man. I think, it's going to be a fun game tomorrow, Andy. What say you?
Yeah, I will also echo to go follow Drake and Locked On Big 12 because he's one of my favorites, and that show is fantastic. And I know a lot of Zag fans are interested in Big 12 basketball, even if that's not the direction that Gonzaga is ultimately going. But I'm excited about this game. I'm excited about Atlantis. Having watched so many games in Maui, I'm ready for our tournament to begin.
All right, guys. Thank you guys for coming in this episode. It's going to be fun. We'll do an after show tomorrow here on Locked On West Virginia. Are you doing one, Andy?
I will be doing one. Yep.
So make sure you check out our respective post-game reports on this game, and we'll see you then, guys. We're out.